When we step into the world of romantic relationships, we encounter challenges that often seem puzzling and incomprehensible at first glance. This extensive analysis explores a phenomenon that has become increasingly prevalent in modern relationships, yet remains largely undiscussed in mainstream discourse. It is crucial to understand from the outset that this is not a misogynistic attack on women, nor is it an attempt to diminish or invalidate genuine concerns and struggles. Rather, this is a psychological and sociological examination based on observing thousands of relationships, studying behavioral patterns, and recognizing mechanisms that operate with such consistency that they function almost like natural laws. The patterns we will explore throughout this analysis repeat themselves with such remarkable predictability that they cannot be dismissed as coincidence or isolated incidents. Just as the laws of physics apply universally regardless of location or circumstance, certain psychological and behavioral patterns in human relationships manifest with equal consistency across different cultures, backgrounds, and individual circumstances. Understanding these patterns requires us to acknowledge that every human being, regardless of gender, undergoes extensive programming from childhood through adulthood. These programs, shaped by genetics, family dynamics, cultural conditioning, and social influences, fundamentally determine how we perceive reality, form expectations, and interact with others in intimate relationships. Until we develop awareness of these deeply embedded programs, we remain trapped in cycles of repeating the same mistakes, experiencing the same frustrations, and wondering why our sincere efforts fail to produce the desired outcomes. One of the most common refrains heard from men in long-term relationships is a phrase that encapsulates profound frustration and helplessness: "Nothing I do is ever good enough." This statement, repeated by countless men across different demographics, cultures, and socioeconomic backgrounds, reveals a pattern so consistent it demands serious examination. Consider the typical scenarios that play out in relationships experiencing this dynamic. A man brings flowers home as a romantic gesture, only to be told they are the wrong color, the wrong type, or that flowers are wasteful and die too quickly. He plans a date night, carefully selecting what he believes will be a pleasant restaurant, only to discover that the ambience is wrong, the menu is unsuitable, or the location is inconvenient. He attempts to help with household chores, trying to share the domestic burden, but finds that he loads the dishwasher incorrectly, folds laundry the wrong way, or chooses the wrong cleaning products. The paradoxes become even more pronounced when we examine contradictory complaints. If he does not help with housework, he is labeled lazy and inconsiderate. When he does help, he is criticized for doing it incorrectly. If he works long hours to provide financial security for the family, he is accused of being absent and prioritizing work over family. If he reduces his work hours to spend more time at home, he is criticized for lacking ambition and not providing adequately. If he is emotionally expressive and vulnerable, he is considered too soft and not masculine enough. If he maintains traditional masculine stoicism, he is accused of being emotionally unavailable and distant. This comprehensive criticism, this global dissatisfaction with everything a man does, says, thinks, or fails to do, reveals something profound. The dissatisfaction is not actually about the specific actions or behaviors being criticized. The complaints are symptoms of something much deeper, something that exists independent of external circumstances. This realization, though potentially painful, offers liberation from the exhausting and ultimately futile effort to please someone who fundamentally cannot be pleased. The recognition of these patterns often comes through painful personal experience. Many men go through multiple relationships before they begin to notice the consistency of certain dynamics. Consider a scenario where a man dates several different women over a period of years. These women might come from completely different backgrounds, represent different ages, pursue different careers, and display distinctly different personalities. On the surface, they appear to have nothing in common. Yet despite these apparent differences, the relationship trajectory follows an identical pattern. There is an initial period of happiness, often called the honeymoon phase, where everything seems perfect. Both partners are excited, optimistic, and satisfied. Gradually, however, dissatisfaction begins to emerge. What starts as minor complaints slowly escalates into comprehensive criticism of nearly every aspect of the relationship and the man's behavior. In one relationship, the complaint might be that the man is not romantic enough, that he fails to create magical moments or express his feelings adequately. Taking this criticism to heart, in the next relationship the man goes to extraordinary lengths to be romantic. He plans surprise trips, writes poetry, creates elaborate gestures of affection, and constantly expresses his emotions. Yet now the complaint shifts. He is told he is too soft, not masculine enough, too emotional, lacking in strength and decisiveness. Adapting again, in a subsequent relationship the man becomes more dominant. He takes charge, makes decisions confidently, and projects traditional masculine strength. But this approach also generates complaints. Now he is criticized for not considering his partner's opinions enough, for being too controlling, for not valuing her input in decisions. The complaints change, but the underlying dissatisfaction remains constant. This repetitive pattern reveals a fundamental truth that many men resist accepting because it challenges the assumption that they have control over their partner's happiness. The dissatisfaction is not actually about the specific behaviors being criticized. It is a pre-existing condition, a baseline state that will manifest regardless of external circumstances. The women exhibiting this pattern were unhappy before these relationships, remained unhappy during them, and continue to be unhappy after they end. The unhappiness originates from within, not from external circumstances or partner behavior. To understand why some individuals seem perpetually dissatisfied regardless of circumstances, we must first examine the biological foundation of personality and temperament. Scientific research in behavioral genetics has demonstrated that approximately 50% of personality traits, including the tendency toward optimism or pessimism, are hereditary. This means that before any environmental factors come into play, some individuals are born with brain chemistry and neural patterns that predispose them toward seeing the negative aspects of situations. This is not a minor influence. For these individuals, the default setting is dissatisfaction. Their baseline emotional state tends toward complaint rather than contentment. Their natural cognitive pattern is to scan for what is wrong rather than appreciate what is right. Without conscious, sustained effort to rewire these patterns through therapy, mindfulness practices, or other interventions, they will remain perpetually dissatisfied regardless of their life circumstances, their partner's qualities, or the objective goodness of their situation. Observable patterns across generations provide compelling evidence for this genetic component. In many families, you can trace a lineage of chronic unhappiness through multiple generations. The grandmother was perpetually dissatisfied with her life and marriage. The mother displays the same chronic unhappiness despite potentially having better circumstances. Now the daughter exhibits identical patterns of dissatisfaction, continuing the family legacy. 3 generations of women in such families could theoretically win the lottery, marry exceptionally good men, live in paradise, and still find something to complain about. This is because their brains are literally wired to identify problems, notice deficiencies, and focus on what is lacking rather than what is present. This is not a conscious choice they make each day. It is a genetic predisposition, similar to having brown eyes, being left-handed, or having a particular body type. Just as a left-handed person does not choose their dominant hand, individuals with genetic predispositions toward pessimism and dissatisfaction do not choose their baseline emotional state. However, it is crucial to understand that genetic predisposition is not destiny. Neuroplasticity research has shown that the brain can be rewired through consistent practice and conscious effort. But this requires awareness of the problem and sustained commitment to change, which many people lack. Without this awareness and effort, the genetic programming continues to run automatically, determining emotional responses and life satisfaction levels. While genetics provides the biological foundation, childhood experiences construct the psychological framework that determines how adults approach relationships. Every chronically unhappy woman shares certain childhood scenarios, sometimes experiencing one, sometimes both, and sometimes variations that combine elements of both. The first significant scenario involves a problematic relationship with the father. This can manifest in numerous ways, each leaving distinct but related psychological imprints. The father might have been physically absent, either due to abandonment, divorce, death, or simply being away for work constantly. This absence creates a fundamental sense of abandonment and the belief that men will leave, that masculine presence is unreliable, and that depending on men is dangerous. Alternatively, the father might have been physically present but emotionally absent. He might have been in the home but distant, uncommunicative, and uninvolved in his daughter's emotional life. This creates a different wound, one where masculine presence exists but provides no emotional nourishment or validation. The daughter grows up feeling invisible to the masculine, believing that even when men are present, they do not truly see her or care about her inner world. In more severe cases, the father might have been actively abusive, either physically, emotionally, or verbally. This creates deep trauma and a fundamental distrust of masculine energy. The daughter learns that men are dangerous, that they will hurt you, and that vulnerability around men leads to pain. Regardless of which specific father wound scenario occurred, the result is similar. The girl grows up with a deep, often unconscious resentment toward masculinity itself. She develops a subconscious conviction that men will inevitably disappoint her, hurt her, or fail to meet her needs. This becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy in her adult relationships. She might unconsciously choose men who will indeed disappoint her, drawn to partners who recreate the familiar dynamic she experienced with her father. Or she might enter relationships with genuinely good men but have such impossibly high standards, such vigilant mistrust, and such quick readiness to interpret normal human flaws as betrayal that even the best man becomes a disappointment. The programming runs so deep that she cannot recognize a good man when she has one because her internal system is calibrated to expect disappointment. The second major childhood scenario involves observing the mother's chronic dissatisfaction. Children are incredible learners, absorbing information from their environment like sponges. They learn not just from what parents explicitly teach but from what they model in their daily behavior and emotional patterns. A daughter who grows up watching her mother be perpetually dissatisfied absorbs this as the template for normal female behavior. She observes her mother constantly complaining about her father, criticizing everything he does, never being happy with what she has, always wanting more, different, or better. The mother might express regret about her life choices, communicate that she's settled, or convey the message that her husband is a burden rather than a partner. The daughter watches this dynamic play out day after day, year after year, throughout her entire developmental period. She learns that this is what marriage looks like. She internalizes that this is how women are supposed to relate to their husbands. She absorbs the belief that being a wife means being perpetually disappointed and that expressing satisfaction or gratitude would somehow be weak or settling. By the time this daughter reaches adulthood and enters her own relationships, the programming is so deeply embedded in her psyche that she does not even recognize it as programming. She believes she is simply being authentic, expressing her genuine feelings, and having reasonable standards. She does not realize she is running her mother's software, recreating the same patterns of chronic dissatisfaction she witnessed growing up. Many women consciously swear they will never be like their mothers. They recognize the unhappiness they witnessed and genuinely want different outcomes. Yet without deep psychological work to identify and change these patterns, they find themselves unconsciously recreating the same dynamics. They catch themselves saying the exact same phrases their mothers used, making the same complaints, creating the same atmosphere of dissatisfaction. The familiarity of these patterns makes them feel correct and natural, even when they are destructive. This is one of the most powerful principles in psychology. Humans, when operating unconsciously, will always choose the familiar over the happy. The known, even when painful, feels safer than the unknown. Misery that feels like home is chosen over happiness that feels foreign and suspicious. Modern culture has created unprecedented expectations around romantic relationships, and these inflated expectations have become a primary source of chronic dissatisfaction. From early childhood, girls are immersed in fantasy narratives about love and relationships that have almost no connection to reality. Disney princesses and fairy tales teach that the right man will rescue you from your problems, that true love conquers all obstacles, and that finding your prince leads to happily ever after. These stories end at the wedding, never showing the mundane reality of daily life, conflicts over finances, disagreements about parenting, or the simple boredom that comes from routine. Young girls internalize these narratives as blueprints for what their lives should become. They develop the expectation that they will be swept off their feet, carried in strong arms, rescued from whatever difficulties they face, and transported into a life of perpetual romance and adventure. As girls mature into teenagers and young women, romantic comedies reinforce and elaborate these fantasies. These movies show dramatic gestures, passionate declarations of love, conflicts that are resolved through grand romantic actions, and relationships that seem to require no real work or compromise. The male leads in these movies are impossibly perfect combinations of characteristics: strong but sensitive, successful but attentive, confident but humble, passionate but stable. Real men, being actual human beings rather than fictional characters designed to fulfill fantasies, inevitably fall short of these impossible standards. They have flaws, insecurities, bad days, boring routines, and limitations. They cannot be everything all the time because no human being can be everything all the time. Social media has exponentially amplified the fantasy-reality gap. Every woman now has constant access to carefully curated, heavily filtered versions of thousands of other people's lives. She sees highlights and peak moments while comparing them to her complete reality, including all the mundane, difficult, and unglamorous aspects. She sees a colleague's anniversary gift, a sister's home renovation, a friend's weight loss transformation, and a neighbor's new car. Each of these becomes proof that her own life is inadequate. She focuses exclusively on what others have that she lacks, never noticing what she has that others lack. This creates a permanent state of feeling cheated, feeling behind, feeling like everyone else got the good life while she got stuck with ordinary reality. When a woman enters a relationship with these unrealistic expectations, disappointment is inevitable. She expects marriage to be a fairy tale, but marriage is actually bills, chores, routines, and two imperfect humans trying to build a life together. She expects her partner to be a prince who rescues her and makes her feel complete, but her partner is a human man with his own needs, limitations, and struggles. Most devastatingly, she expects the relationship to heal all her childhood wounds, fill all the empty spaces in her soul, and make her feel whole. When this does not happen, when she still feels empty inside because those internal wounds can only be healed through personal inner work, she blames her partner. He is not romantic enough, not successful enough, not attentive enough, not something enough to fix what is broken inside her. Consider the example of Anna, a woman who appeared to have everything. She was beautiful, intelligent, well-educated, and socially successful. She married a genuinely good man who adored her, treated her well, and provided stability. By any objective measure, she had an enviable life and relationship. Yet within 6 months of marriage, Anna was profoundly miserable. She complained constantly about her husband. He was not romantic enough, despite his regular attempts at romantic gestures. He was not successful enough, despite having a stable, respectable career. He was not emotionally available enough, despite his attempts to connect with her. The reality was that Anna had entered marriage expecting it to solve all her internal problems. She had unresolved childhood wounds, deep insecurities, and a fundamental sense of emptiness that she had never addressed. She unconsciously believed that finding the right man and getting married would magically fill these internal voids. When marriage failed to perform this impossible function, when she still felt empty and insecure despite being married to a good man, she could not accept that the problem was internal. Accepting that would require difficult inner work, facing painful emotions, and taking responsibility for her own healing. Instead, she projected the problem onto her husband. If only he were more romantic, she would feel loved. If only he were more successful, she would feel secure. If only he were more attentive, she would feel whole. This is psychological projection at its most destructive. Internal emptiness gets blamed on external circumstances. The target of blame constantly shifts because the real problem is never addressed. If the husband becomes more romantic, then the complaint shifts to something else. If he earns more money, a new deficiency is identified. If he becomes more attentive, he is criticized for being clingy and not giving enough space. The dissatisfaction has nothing to do with the specific complaints because the dissatisfaction originates from an internal wound that external circumstances cannot heal. If the fantasy-reality gap creates impossible expectations, social media and constant comparison transform those expectations into toxic dissatisfaction. Never before in human history have people had such extensive access to information about others' lives. This unprecedented visibility into thousands of other people's experiences, possessions, relationships, and achievements has created a comparison epidemic that is destroying contentment and satisfaction. Social media platforms function as highlight reels. People share their best moments, greatest achievements, most beautiful photographs, and happiest experiences. What they do not share are the mundane details, the struggles, the failures, the arguments, and the disappointments. This creates a fundamentally distorted view of reality. Every woman is now comparing her complete reality, including all the boring, difficult, and unglamorous parts, to everyone else's carefully curated highlight reel. She sees someone's perfect vacation photos but does not see the argument they had at the airport or the credit card debt they incurred. She sees someone's anniversary gift but does not see the weeks of tension that preceded it. She sees someone's beautiful home but does not see the financial stress or time commitment required to maintain it. This comparison is psychologically devastating because it is inherently unfair. You cannot lose a competition where you bring your complete reality and everyone else brings only their best moments. Yet this is the competition modern women engage in constantly, often unconsciously. Throughout every day, social media has also created a culture where life experiences are quantified and ranked through likes, comments, and shares. A woman posts about her relationship, and the response she receives becomes a measure of whether her relationship is good enough. This external validation seeking creates dependency on others' opinions and reduces personal satisfaction to a popularity contest. When her post receives less engagement than someone else's post about their relationship, it creates the feeling that her relationship is inferior, even if her actual lived experience is deeply satisfying. The external metrics override internal experience, creating dissatisfaction where none existed before. The result of constant comparison is that envy becomes a chronic emotional state rather than an occasional feeling. A woman sees a colleague's anniversary gift and feels envious. She sees her sister's home renovation and feels inadequate. She sees her friend's weight loss and feels bad about her own body. She sees her neighbor's new car and feels like she is falling behind. Each of these instances of envy accumulates. Rather than being able to be happy with what she has, she maintains a running tally of everything others have that she lacks. This creates a permanent state of feeling cheated, feeling behind, and feeling like life is unfair. No matter what she achieves or acquires, there will always be someone who has more, has done more, or appears to be happier. When envy becomes chronic, satisfaction becomes impossible. Even genuine achievements and positive experiences are diminished by the immediate comparison to what others have achieved. A promotion at work is devalued because a colleague got a bigger promotion. A nice vacation is diminished because someone else went somewhere more exotic. A thoughtful gift from a partner is insufficient because someone else's partner gave something more expensive or more Instagram-worthy. This constant comparison ensures that nothing is ever enough. No achievement is sufficient, no possession is adequate, no experience is satisfying because there is always someone who has more or better. The target of adequacy constantly moves, always staying just out of reach, ensuring perpetual dissatisfaction. One of the most destructive dynamics in modern relationships involves women feeling compelled to be inauthentic about who they really are, their true preferences, and their genuine personalities. This inauthenticity is not necessarily conscious manipulation, though it can appear that way. Rather, it is often a deeply ingrained survival strategy learned from childhood and reinforced by cultural messages about what women must be to attract and keep a man. From childhood, many girls receive explicit and implicit messages that their authentic selves are not good enough, not desirable, and will lead to rejection. They learn to read social cues carefully, adapt their behavior to what others want, and present versions of themselves that are calculated to please rather than genuine expressions of their true nature. This conditioning intensifies around romantic relationships. Girls and women receive countless messages about what men want: a woman who is easygoing but not boring, sexual but not promiscuous, independent but not intimidating, attractive but not high maintenance, successful but not more successful than him, intelligent but not threatening. These contradictory requirements are impossible to actually embody, so instead women learn to perform. When a woman is dating and trying to attract a man, she presents a carefully constructed version of herself. If she is naturally demanding and particular, she presents herself as easygoing and flexible. If she has a low sex drive or is uncomfortable with sexuality, she acts highly sexual and enthusiastic during the dating phase. If she dislikes domestic tasks and housework, she presents herself as naturally domestic and nurturing. If she has strong opinions and a controlling nature, she acts agreeable and accommodating. None of this is necessarily conscious deception in the traditional sense. She may genuinely believe she can maintain this performance indefinitely, or she may rationalize that she is simply putting her best foot forward, or she may be so disconnected from her authentic self that she genuinely does not know who she really is beneath the performance. The man, taking this presentation at face value, falls in love with the performed version. He believes he is partnering with an easygoing, sexual, domestic, agreeable woman. This is who he believes he is marrying. After the wedding, when the relationship is legally and socially secured, the mask inevitably begins to slip. Maintaining a performance indefinitely is psychologically and emotionally exhausting. The woman cannot sustain being someone she is not forever. Her true nature, preferences, and personality begin to emerge. The previously easygoing woman reveals herself to be demanding and particular about everything. The previously sexual woman becomes disinterested or uncomfortable with sex. The previously domestic woman expresses hatred for housework and resentment at being expected to do it. The previously agreeable woman reveals her need for control and her strong opinions that must be accommodated. This creates a situation of double resentment. The woman resents that she had to perform in the first place. She is angry that her authentic self would not have been chosen, angry that she had to hide her true nature, angry that she exhausted herself maintaining a false presentation. She directs this anger at her husband, even though he did nothing wrong except take her presentation at face value. Simultaneously, she resents him for not seeing through the mask. On some level, she wanted him to perceive her true self beneath the performance and love her anyway. His failure to see through her act feels like a rejection of her authentic self, even though she actively hid that authentic self from him. The man, meanwhile, feels confused and betrayed. The woman he fell in love with seems to have disappeared, replaced by someone completely different. He did not sign up for this person, did not choose this person, and finds himself married to someone who is fundamentally different from who he thought he was marrying. Yet he is the one blamed for the situation. The exhaustion of performing authenticity breeds deep resentment. The resentment manifests as chronic dissatisfaction, criticism, and complaints about everything. The woman is not necessarily conscious that her dissatisfaction stems from resentment about having to perform. She experiences it as genuine dissatisfaction with her partner and relationship. This dynamic is particularly insidious because it makes honest conversation nearly impossible. The man cannot address the real problem because the woman herself is not consciously aware of what the real problem is. She genuinely believes her complaints are about his behavior, his inadequacies, and his failures, when actually they are expressions of her resentment about having to be inauthentic to secure the relationship in the first place. Modern feminist ideology, particularly in its more mainstream cultural manifestations, has created a dynamic in relationships that is psychologically incompatible with genuine partnership and mutual respect. Many women have internalized messages that position them as inherently superior to men, as prizes to be won, as queens and goddesses who deserve worship rather than partnership. From childhood through adulthood, modern women are bombarded with messages about their inherent superiority and special status. They are told they are queens who deserve to be treated as royalty. They are called goddesses who should be worshipped. They are positioned as prizes that men should compete for and feel grateful to win. They are told they deserve everything and that men should be grateful for their mere presence. Popular culture, from songs to movies to social media, reinforces these messages constantly. Men are frequently portrayed as incompetent, childish, and in need of female management. Women are positioned as the mature, capable, long-suffering partners who generously tolerate male inadequacy. This cultural narrative creates a framework where men are viewed as inferior beings whose primary purpose is to serve, provide for, and worship women. This creates a fundamental psychological paradox that makes satisfying relationships impossible. It is psychologically impossible to genuinely respect what you consider inferior to yourself. If you view someone as beneath you, as less capable, less mature, less valuable, you cannot maintain authentic respect for them. Simultaneously, it is psychologically impossible to be happy in a romantic relationship with someone you do not respect. Respect is a fundamental requirement for genuine connection, attraction, and partnership. Without respect, the relationship becomes a transaction where one person provides and the other consumes, where one person serves and the other is served. This creates a particular paradox for heterosexual women who are attracted to masculine energy, strength, and leadership. Traditional masculine qualities include strength, decisiveness, leadership, and capability. Women are biologically and psychologically attracted to these qualities in men. However, if a woman has internalized the belief that men are inferior, that she is superior, that she is the prize and he should be grateful, she cannot respect the man for exhibiting these qualities. She simultaneously wants him to be strong and lead while also positioning herself as superior to him. These two positions are incompatible. The result is that she is attracted to qualities she cannot respect because respecting them would contradict her belief in her own superiority. This creates constant internal tension and external criticism. She wants him to be strong but resents his strength. She wants him to lead but challenges his leadership. She wants him to be capable but criticizes how he does things. When a woman views herself as fundamentally superior to men, the relationship becomes service-based rather than partnership-based. She sees his role as serving her needs, providing for her wants, and making her happy. His value becomes purely functional. What can he do for her? What can he provide? How can he make her life better? This creates an inherently dissatisfying dynamic for both parties. He is reduced to a service provider rather than a respected partner. She can never experience genuine connection because you cannot have genuine connection with someone you view as existing primarily to serve you. The relationship becomes transactional, and transactions can never satisfy the deep human need for authentic partnership and mutual respect. Once respect is lost, contempt develops. Contempt is one of the strongest predictors of relationship failure identified in relationship research. When a woman holds contempt for her partner, viewing him as inferior and incompetent, she expresses this through sarcasm, mockery, criticism, and dismissiveness. The man, being treated with contempt, often responds in one of two ways. He might become defensive and resentful, creating conflict and hostility in the relationship. Or he might become submissive and placating, trying harder to please her and prove his worth, which only increases her contempt because submission to someone you view as inferior confirms their inferiority. Either response reinforces the dynamic. Conflict proves he is problematic. Submission proves he is weak. There is no action he can take that will restore respect because the fundamental framework views him as inherently inferior. One of the most painful patterns to observe in relationships is active self-sabotage, where women seem to deliberately destroy their own happiness and create problems where none existed. This is not conscious malice or intentional manipulation. Rather, it is a deeply unconscious pattern driven by psychological wounds and distorted beliefs about what is normal, safe, and deserved. For women who grew up in dysfunctional family environments, dysfunction feels like home. It is familiar, predictable, and known. Even though it is painful, there is a certain comfort in the familiar. The brain, operating on unconscious patterns, will recreate what is familiar because the familiar feels safe even when it is objectively harmful. A woman who grew up with chaos, conflict, and instability learned that this is what relationships look like. Even if she consciously desires peace and stability, her unconscious mind associates peace with suspicion and stability with danger because they are unfamiliar. The peaceful, stable relationship feels wrong, feels temporary, feels like the calm before the storm. To resolve the discomfort of unfamiliar peace, the unconscious mind will create the expected disaster. She might start arguments over nothing, create drama where none exists, or interpret neutral actions as slights and betrayals. She is not consciously choosing to destroy her happiness. She is unconsciously recreating the familiar dysfunction to alleviate the anxiety created by unfamiliar peace. This manifests in confusing and contradictory behavior. She says she wants stability but creates chaos. She says she wants peace but starts fights. She says she wants love but pushes away affection when it is offered. She says she wants commitment but sabotages the relationship through her behavior. Some women have what can be described as a happiness allergy. They have been unhappy for so long, through so much of their life, that happiness feels foreign, suspicious, and temporary. They do not trust happiness because their experience has taught them that good things do not last and that happiness is always followed by pain. When they experience genuine happiness in a relationship, rather than enjoying it, they become anxious waiting for it to end. The anxiety becomes so overwhelming that they decide to end it themselves rather than wait for the inevitable disaster they believe is coming. At least if they destroy it themselves, they have control over the timing and manner of the destruction. This is a preemptive strike against pain. If I destroy the good thing before life destroys it, then I maintain some sense of control. The problem is that this pattern ensures happiness can never be sustained. Every time genuine happiness appears, it gets destroyed, confirming the belief that happiness is impossible. For women with deep childhood wounds and extensive damage from past relationships, the ability to recognize a good man and a good relationship can be completely impaired. Their calibration is so distorted that they cannot distinguish between healthy and unhealthy, good and bad, safe and dangerous. A genuinely good man who treats her well, respects her, and wants a healthy partnership might feel boring, suspicious, or too nice. She might interpret his kindness as weakness, his stability as boring, his respect as lack of passion. Meanwhile, men who display red flags, who are inconsistent, who create drama might feel exciting, passionate, and real because that is what she learned relationships are supposed to feel like. This distorted calibration ensures she will either reject good men or, if she stays with one, will be unable to appreciate what she has. She will create problems to make the relationship feel more familiar, more like what she believes relationships should be. Perhaps the darkest and most intractable aspect of chronic female unhappiness is when it becomes a core part of identity. At this stage, unhappiness is no longer a temporary state or even a chronic condition. It becomes who the person fundamentally believes they are. Identity forms through repeated experiences and the stories we tell ourselves about those experiences. When someone has been unhappy for years or decades, when unhappiness has been their primary emotional state through most of their conscious life, it becomes woven into their sense of self. They begin to identify as an unhappy person. Unhappiness is not something they experience, it is who they are. This shift from state to identity is crucial because changing a state is possible, but changing identity requires fundamentally reconstructing one's sense of self, which is one of the most difficult psychological tasks possible. Unhappiness as identity is socially reinforced, particularly among women. Female friendship often centers on commiseration, mutual complaints, and shared grievances. Women bond by complaining about their partners, their lives, their circumstances. This creates a social structure where unhappiness is currency and connection. A woman who is genuinely happy might find herself excluded from these bonding rituals. She cannot participate in complaint sessions, cannot commiserate about terrible husbands, and cannot bond over shared misery. This creates social pressure to maintain unhappiness to maintain social connections. Additionally, unhappiness garners attention and sympathy. The perpetually unhappy woman receives support, validation, and attention from others. She becomes known as the one who has it hard, the one who deserves sympathy, and the one who needs support. If she became happy, she would lose this attention and the identity of someone who deserves special consideration. Related to unhappiness as identity is the development of victim identity. The chronically unhappy woman positions herself as a victim of circumstances, of her partner, of life's unfairness. This victim position provides psychological benefits that are difficult to surrender. As a victim, she bears no responsibility for her circumstances. Everything wrong in her life is someone else's fault. Her partner is responsible for her unhappiness. Her parents are responsible for her wounds. Society is responsible for her struggles. This absolves her of the difficult work of taking responsibility for her own emotional state and making the changes necessary to improve her life. Victimhood also provides moral superiority. Victims are good, perpetrators are bad. By positioning herself as a victim, she claims moral high ground. She is the innocent party, the one who was wronged, the one who deserves compensation and special treatment. If unhappiness has become identity, then becoming happy requires destroying that identity and constructing a new one. This is terrifying. Who would she be if she were not unhappy? How would she relate to the world? How would she maintain her friendships? What would she talk about? How would she get attention? Happiness would require changing everything about how she relates to herself, others, and the world. It would require taking responsibility for her life, surrendering victim status, doing difficult inner work, and becoming someone completely different. For many, this feels impossible or not worth the effort. The familiar unhappiness, despite being painful, is preferable to the unknown territory of happiness. When unhappiness is identity, no external change can fix it. This is why attempting to make a chronically unhappy woman happy through external actions is futile. You solve one problem, she finds another. You meet one need, she develops a new one. You fix one complaint, she creates another. The problems being complained about are not the actual problem. The actual problem is the identity structure built around unhappiness. Until that identity is reconstructed, no amount of external change will create lasting satisfaction. The unhappiness will simply find new expressions, new complaints, and new problems to attach itself to. This explains why some women can have objectively wonderful lives and still be miserable. Good husband, financial security, healthy children, beautiful home, and still perpetually dissatisfied. The external circumstances are irrelevant because the unhappiness is internal and identity-based. The patterns of chronic female unhappiness exact a terrible toll on the men who love these women. Good, sincere, well-intentioned men spend years, decades, sometimes entire lifetimes trying to make unhappy women happy, not understanding that the task is impossible. The man begins with normal relationship efforts. He tries to be a good partner, meet her needs, and make her happy. When she expresses dissatisfaction, he naturally assumes he needs to do more, try harder, be better. This is the logical response to a partner's unhappiness: identify the problem and fix it. He increases his efforts. He becomes more attentive, more helpful, more accommodating. He sacrifices more of his own needs, desires, and preferences to prioritize hers. He works longer hours to provide more money. He does more housework to reduce her burden. He is more romantic, more present, and more emotionally available. But the dissatisfaction continues. So he sacrifices more. He gives up hobbies to spend more time with her. He distances himself from friends she does not like. He changes aspects of his personality that she criticizes. He becomes whoever she says she wants him to be. Still, the dissatisfaction continues. The spiral continues until he has sacrificed everything: his identity, his interests, his friendships, his sense of self, and she is still unhappy. At this point, he has nothing left to give, and she is no happier than when he started. This process inflicts severe psychological damage on men. They develop anxiety, constantly worried about what they are doing wrong and what they need to change. They develop depression, feeling hopeless about ever being good enough or making their partner happy. Their confidence erodes. If everything you do is criticized, if nothing you do is ever good enough, you begin to believe that you are fundamentally inadequate. You internalize the criticism and develop a deep sense of worthlessness. Many men lose themselves entirely in this process. They become so focused on what she wants, what she needs, what will make her happy that they lose touch with who they are, what they want, and what they need. They become appendages to her life rather than men with their own legitimate needs and desires. Perhaps most painful is the confusion and sense of betrayal. The man is genuinely trying. He loves his partner and wants her to be happy. He is making sincere efforts and real sacrifices. Yet nothing works. Nothing is ever enough. Nothing makes a lasting difference. He cannot understand why his efforts fail. He believes in cause and effect: if I do good things, good results should follow. If I treat her well, she should be happy. If I meet her needs, she should be satisfied. But this logical framework does not apply when dealing with chronic unhappiness rooted in genetics, childhood wounds, and identity structures. The confusion creates a sense of living in an alternate reality where normal rules do not apply. He feels like he is going insane because his efforts produce no results, his sacrifices generate no appreciation, and his love seems to mean nothing. Many men go through this pattern across multiple relationships before they recognize the common factor. They blame themselves for the first relationship's failure, believing they just were not good enough. In the next relationship, they try harder, do better, and the same pattern emerges. After several repetitions, they might finally recognize that the common factor is not their inadequacy but the type of woman they are choosing or the impossible nature of the task they are attempting. The central truth that men must accept, painful though it is that you cannot make a chronically unhappy woman happy. This is not a reflection on your adequacy as a man, your worth as a partner, or the quality of your efforts. It is simply an acknowledgement of psychological reality. Chronic unhappiness, as we have explored throughout this analysis, originates from internal factors, genetics, childhood wounds, distorted thinking patterns, identity structures. These internal factors cannot be fixed through external actions. No amount of romantic gestures can heal her father wound. No amount of financial provision can rewire her genetic predisposition toward pessimism. No amount of attention and affection can fill the internal void created by childhood trauma. These wounds require internal work, therapy, self-reflection, conscious effort to change patterns that only she can do. Your presence, your efforts, your love, and your sacrifices can provide support for someone doing that internal work. But they cannot substitute for the work itself. If she is not doing the internal work, your external efforts will have no lasting impact on her happiness. The diagnostic question is simple: was she happy before you? Look at her history. Was she happy in previous relationships? Was she happy before those relationships? Does she have a pattern of general life satisfaction and contentment? Does she practice gratitude and appreciate what she has? If the answer to these questions is no, then you are dealing with a pre-existing condition. Her unhappiness existed before you and will continue after you. It is not about you, not caused by you, and cannot be fixed by you. Many men resist this truth because accepting it means surrendering the illusion of control. We want to believe that if we just do the right things, we can create the outcome we desire. But some things are beyond our control, and another person's chronic unhappiness is one of them. If she has been through multiple relationships and been unhappy in all of them, despite partners who were different in personality, behavior, and approach, the common factor is her, not them. If she is dissatisfied with every area of her life, her job, her friends, her family, her living situation, her hobbies, the problem is her internal state, not external circumstances. This pattern recognition is crucial. It allows you to see the situation clearly rather than through the distorted lens of thinking everything depends on your behavior. Another critical question: does she take responsibility for her own emotional state, or does she consistently blame external factors and other people for how she feels? A person who takes responsibility for their own happiness says things like, "I'm feeling unhappy, and I need to figure out what internal work I need to do to address this." They recognize that their emotional state is primarily their responsibility. A person who does not take responsibility says things like, "You make me unhappy. If only you would change, I would be happy. My unhappiness is your fault." They position their emotional state as primarily dependent on others' actions. If your partner does not take responsibility for her own emotional state, she will never be happy because she is waiting for external factors to change rather than doing the internal work necessary for happiness. Gratitude is one of the strongest predictors of happiness and life satisfaction. People who regularly practice gratitude, who notice and appreciate what they have rather than constantly focusing on what they lack, tend to be significantly happier than those who do not. Does your partner practice gratitude? Does she regularly express appreciation for what she has, for what you do, for the positive aspects of her life? Or does she primarily focus on what is missing, what is wrong, what could be better? A person without gratitude cannot be satisfied because satisfaction requires appreciating what you have. Without that appreciation, no amount is ever enough. Finally, does your partner have realistic expectations about relationships, life, and human nature? Or has she internalized fantasy expectations from Disney, romantic comedies, and social media that no reality can match? A person with realistic expectations understands that relationships require work, that partners are imperfect humans, that life includes mundane routines, and that happiness comes from internal states rather than external perfection. They can be satisfied with good enough. A person with unrealistic expectations believes relationships should be effortless, partners should be perfect, life should be constantly exciting, and happiness should come from having the right circumstances. They can never be satisfied because reality will always fall short of fantasy. Understanding that you cannot make a chronically unhappy woman happy is not a message of despair. It is a message of liberation. It frees you from an impossible task, from endless self-blame, and from the futile effort to fix something you did not break and cannot repair. There is profound peace in surrendering an impossible task. When you truly accept that her happiness is not your responsibility and is not within your control, you can stop sacrificing yourself in futile attempts to achieve the impossible. You can stop monitoring everything you say and do, constantly worried about whether it will make her happy or upset her. You can stop walking on eggshells, trying to be perfect, attempting to anticipate and prevent every complaint. You can stop twisting yourself into knots trying to be whoever she says she wants you to be. This does not mean becoming selfish or uncaring. It means recognizing appropriate boundaries around responsibility. You are responsible for treating her with respect, honoring your commitments, and being a good partner. You are not responsible for her emotional state, her life satisfaction, or her happiness. Those are her responsibilities. When you stop sacrificing everything trying to make her happy, you can begin reclaiming your own identity. You can reconnect with interests and hobbies you abandoned. You can rebuild friendships you distanced yourself from. You can remember who you are beyond being someone's partner. This reclamation is essential for your own well-being. You are a complete person with legitimate needs, desires, interests, and an identity beyond the relationship. Sacrificing all of that does not create a better relationship. It creates resentment, emptiness, and the loss of the person your partner theoretically fell in love with in the first place. Understanding these patterns allows you to make informed decisions about relationships rather than stumbling blindly hoping things will improve. You can assess potential partners for these patterns before committing. You can recognize red flags early rather than years into a relationship. If you are already in a relationship with a chronically unhappy woman, you can make clear-eyed decisions about whether to stay or leave. You can assess whether she is doing the internal work necessary to change, or whether she is committed to her unhappiness. You can decide whether you are willing to be in a relationship with someone who may never be satisfied, making that choice consciously rather than remaining out of guilt, hope, or denial. Understanding that her happiness is her responsibility allows you to set appropriate boundaries. You can establish what behavior you will and will not accept. You can refuse to participate in dysfunction, refuse to enable her avoidance of responsibility, and refuse to sacrifice your own well-being in futile attempts to make her happy. These boundaries are not punishment. They are essential for maintaining your own psychological health and creating the possibility of a functional relationship. A person who respects boundaries has an opportunity to learn and grow. A person who faces no boundaries never develops the motivation to change. For men navigating relationships with chronically unhappy women, or trying to avoid such relationships in the future, practical wisdom based on these understandings is essential. Before making serious commitments, especially marriage, assess the woman's baseline happiness level. How was she before you? Does she have a history of general contentment? Can she identify things she is grateful for? Does she take responsibility for her own emotional state? Look at her family patterns. What is her mother like? Her grandmother? Is there a pattern of chronic unhappiness across generations? While genetics is not destiny, it is a risk factor worth considering. Observe how she talks about previous partners. If every ex is terrible, if she was miserable in every previous relationship despite very different partners, you will likely become the next in that line of terrible exes who made her miserable. Certain patterns serve as red flags indicating chronic unhappiness. Constant complaints about everything, nothing is ever good enough, gratitude is absent or rare, blames others for her emotional state, victim mentality, cannot identify anything positive about life, focuses exclusively on what is missing rather than what is present, unrealistic expectations about relationships, patterns of dissatisfaction across all life areas, family history of chronic unhappiness. These red flags, especially when present in combination, indicate that happiness with this person will be impossible regardless of your efforts. If you are already in a relationship or marriage with a chronically unhappy woman, you have several options. Option 1, leave. This is the most straightforward solution, though often the most difficult emotionally and practically. If she is unwilling to do the internal work necessary to change, if she refuses to take responsibility for her own happiness, if she is committed to her victim identity and chronic dissatisfaction, leaving may be the only way to preserve your own well-being. Option 2, stay with boundaries. If you choose to stay, establish clear boundaries. Refuse to accept verbal abuse, constant criticism, or disrespect. Make clear that you are willing to be a partner but not a savior, that you will support her if she does the work to change but will not sacrifice yourself trying to fix her. This requires tremendous strength and consistency. She will test the boundaries. She will escalate her behavior when you first enforce them. But if you remain consistent, there is a possibility she will recognize that her patterns are no longer working and choose to change. Option 3, stay and accept. Some men choose to stay in these relationships and accept the chronic unhappiness as a permanent condition. They accept that their partner will never be satisfied, will always complain, and will always be dissatisfied. This is a valid choice if made consciously and with full awareness of what it entails. It is not a valid choice if made out of guilt, false hope, or fear. If you choose this path, do so with your eyes open, ensuring you maintain your own identity, interests, and well-being despite the relationship dynamics. Regardless of which path you choose, maintaining your own psychological well-being is non-negotiable. You cannot pour from an empty cup. You cannot be a good partner if you are broken inside. You cannot sacrifice yourself into nothing and have anything positive to offer. Maintain your friendships, interests, and identity. Practice self-care. Set boundaries around how you will be treated. Refuse to internalize constant criticism. Recognize that you are a human being with worth independent of your partner's assessment. The patterns of chronic female unhappiness we have explored exist not in isolation but within a broader societal context that both creates and reinforces them. Modern culture sends women fundamentally contradictory and unrealistic messages. Be independent but also find a man to complete you. Be strong but also feminine. Be sexually liberated but also relationship-oriented. Have high standards but also be accepting. Pursue your career but also prioritize family. Be confident but also humble. These contradictory messages create internal conflict and confusion. Women receive praise for one set of behaviors and simultaneous criticism for those same behaviors. This makes satisfaction impossible because any choice is simultaneously right and wrong depending on which cultural message you are following. Previous generations had clear, if limiting, templates for what it meant to be a woman, a wife, a mother. These templates provided structure, clear expectations, and defined roles. While these templates were often restrictive and prevented women from pursuing their full potential, they also provided clarity and reduced anxiety about choices. Modern women have freedom previous generations never had, which is genuinely positive. However, this freedom comes with the burden of creating their own templates from scratch. Every woman must figure out for herself what it means to be a woman, how to balance different life aspects, what to prioritize. This creates enormous anxiety and the constant possibility that you are doing it wrong. Modern economic realities require most families to have two incomes. This means women are expected to contribute financially while often still bearing the primary burden of childcare and domestic labor. This creates exhaustion, resentment, and the feeling of having multiple full-time jobs. Additionally, consumer culture creates constant pressure to have more, buy more, and achieve a lifestyle that requires increasing amounts of money. This creates financial stress and the feeling that you are never doing enough financially, never achieving the lifestyle you are supposed to have. Traditional communities provided support systems for women, extended family, church communities, and neighborhood networks. These communities provided practical help, emotional support, and shared responsibility for children and domestic tasks. Modern life has largely destroyed these community structures. People move frequently for jobs, live far from extended family, and have little connection to neighbors or local communities. This isolates women, deprives them of practical support, and increases the burden on the nuclear family to provide all support. We have discussed this already, but it bears repeating in the broader context. Social media has created a comparison culture that makes satisfaction impossible. Previous generations compared themselves to neighbors and local community members. Modern women compare themselves to literally millions of other women worldwide, seeing curated highlight reels that represent only the best moments of others' lives. This creates a permanent state of feeling inadequate, of feeling like you are losing a competition, of feeling like everyone else has figured out what you have not. No achievement is satisfying because someone else has achieved more. No possession is enough because someone else has something better. This entire analysis has focused on chronic, pattern-based unhappiness that exists independent of external circumstances. However, it is crucial to acknowledge that sometimes unhappiness is entirely valid, appropriate, and justified by actual problematic circumstances. Chronic unhappiness, as discussed throughout this analysis, is a baseline state that persists regardless of circumstances. The person was unhappy before, is unhappy now, and will be unhappy in the future because the unhappiness is internally generated. Situational unhappiness is a response to genuinely problematic circumstances. If a woman is in a relationship with an abusive partner, her unhappiness is entirely valid and appropriate. If her partner is unfaithful, financially irresponsible, addicted, or genuinely neglectful, her dissatisfaction is justified. The distinction is crucial. Chronic unhappiness cannot be fixed by changing external circumstances because it is not caused by external circumstances. Situational unhappiness can and should be addressed by changing the problematic circumstances. There is a real danger that information like this analysis could be weaponized to gaslight women with legitimate complaints. A man in a relationship might use these concepts to dismiss all complaints, blame all dissatisfaction on his partner's internal problems, and avoid taking responsibility for his own problematic behavior. This is not the intent or appropriate use of this information. If your partner has complaints about specific behaviors, if she can articulate clear problems, if her dissatisfaction is proportional to identifiable issues, her concerns deserve to be heard and addressed. Not all female dissatisfaction is chronic unhappiness. Some of it is entirely appropriate response to actual problems. The question men must ask themselves honestly is, am I actually being a good partner? Am I treating her with respect? Am I honoring my commitments? Am I pulling my weight in the relationship and household? Am I being faithful, honest, and considerate? If the answer to these questions is no, then her unhappiness may be entirely justified. Fix your own behavior before concluding that her unhappiness is chronic and internal. If the answer is yes, if you are genuinely being a good partner and she is still chronically dissatisfied, still constantly complaining, still finding fault with everything, then you are likely dealing with the pattern of chronic unhappiness discussed in this analysis. The patterns explored in this comprehensive analysis paint a challenging picture of chronic female unhappiness rooted in genetics, childhood wounds, distorted thinking, unrealistic expectations, and identity structures. These patterns create dissatisfaction that no external circumstances can remedy and no partner's efforts can fix. For men caught in relationships with chronically unhappy women, this truth is painful. It means accepting that love is not enough, that effort is not enough, that sacrifice is not enough to create happiness in someone who is fundamentally unable to be happy. However, this truth is also liberating. It frees men from the impossible task of trying to fix what they did not break and cannot repair. It allows them to stop sacrificing themselves in futile attempts to achieve the impossible. It permits them to reclaim their own identity, maintain their own well-being, and make clear-eyed decisions about relationships. For women who recognize these patterns in themselves, this analysis offers a map of the internal work required to escape chronic unhappiness. Recognizing genetic predispositions, healing childhood wounds, challenging distorted thinking patterns, developing realistic expectations, practicing gratitude, and reconstructing identity around something other than victimhood and dissatisfaction are all possible, though difficult. The path to happiness, for both men and women, requires radical honesty about these patterns, willingness to see reality clearly rather than through comforting illusions, and courage to make difficult changes and choices. Ultimately, each person is responsible for their own happiness. Partners can support, encourage, and create positive conditions, but they cannot create happiness in someone who is internally predisposed toward unhappiness. Accepting this truth, however painful, is the first step toward either healing chronic unhappiness or protecting yourself from being destroyed by someone else's chronic unhappiness. The goal is not to judge, blame, or condemn anyone for patterns they may not have consciously chosen. The goal is to see reality clearly, understand the mechanisms at work, and make informed decisions that protect well-being and create the possibility of genuine happiness and fulfilling relationships. True change, whether in individuals or relationships, requires first seeing the truth clearly, no matter how uncomfortable that truth might be. Only from a foundation of truth can genuine transformation occur.